Welcome to Renewable New Mexico, a program about the people and companies that make our state an epicenter for renewable energy innovation. My name is Shawn Wells and I'm your host, and today's topic is Growing a Renewable Business Part 1, Bootstrapping. And to help us explore it is our first guest, Wendy Dankoff, founder of Dankoff Solar Products. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start off with a simple question. What brought you to New Mexico?
Well, it was my interest in renewable energy and my need to find a place where I could market it, where I could do it, make a living at it.
And what first spurred on your interest in renewable energy?
It began as a kid. I was fascinated with all things technological, especially electrical. I wanted to know how things worked. I took radios apart and wondered over. I thought, if people could build these things, then I can understand them. And I just don't know why, but I was just wired to do that. And I spent all my childhood fooling around with technological things, making things, breaking things, making things. And then had decided to go to engineering school, naturally, and something intervened. At age 17, I took a summer trip with some friends, went into the woods for a month, did backpacking and so on in wilderness setting, came back into a big city, and the shock of entry into a big city where I perceived an environment dominated by technological constructs that was noisy, dirty, smelly, and the people around me that I saw reflected that. They looked dirty, smelly, noisy, unhealthy, unhappy. This is my perhaps altered or maybe enlightened perspective at that moment. And I thought, also the Vietnam War was going on at that time, so our country was using our technological power to destroy another country. And all of this just made me doubt that I would ever want to work with technology as a professional. Mm-hmm. Might be a good hobby, but what am I going to do with it? This is not the machine that I want to feed. So some years later and some confusion later, I found, I was looking through a magazine for just for something to do, and found an article on how to build a wind-powered generator out of junk parts. And I was just astounded. Here was something that, I mean, my entire being just glowed with this possibility. It was an epiphany to see that my future holds a possibility that I can provide people with electricity in remote places that won't be destroyed by having to bring in power lines and build more power plants but that we can live more harmoniously, and this completely appealed to me. So I studied and studied into it. I had some help at Prescott College in Arizona, where there was a library of alternative energy and resources. And from there, I went off campus to go study with somebody who was writing books on how to build wind generators and how they had been built in the 1930s and 40s. And I figured if they could do it then, we can do it now. So to make it short, when I moved to New Mexico because I could do it as a business here, there was a market. There were people living what we call off-grid, that is, they're like a mile or more from the nearest power line. And of course there's wind here and there's sun here. And within a few years I was supplying people with solar electric and phased out the wind power. But that was what I moved here to do. I needed market. I needed a lively economy, which around Santa Fe had both a lively economy and a remote site market, which was very unique.
Yeah.
And wind and sun. So
And
I parked here near Santa Fe.
It sounds like a perfect fit too.
Yeah.
You knew at the time that New Mexico was a hotbed of renewable energy and solar energy?
I knew there were some other people working on stuff, but it didn't matter where they were. Our networking, this was not internet age, but it was telephone age and mail age, and I knew people all over North America I knew the 50 or so people who were rebuilding wind generators and talking about it and exchanging notes and exchanging parts and teaching each other how we're solving problems and making it work, how we're running a modern home off a set of batteries.
And that must have been a satisfying moment, because as you were speaking about having this engineering background and feeling like it was incompatible with your morality, essentially,
yeah.
and then finding that you could actually be part of the solution by
using
wonderful. Your gifts.
It was wonderful. It gave meaning to my 27-year career that I could do something that really seemed like magic and had a meaning.
And we spoke a little bit about the piece of artwork you're working on, that you're also an artist. I thought it was really beautiful that you work in wood, you carve with wood, and wood to me is the materialization of the sun.
Yeah. Well, even when I was doing my business, when there were times when things were getting routine and I wasn't being creative, I had to start making something. I made flutes, I made sculptures. Whatever it takes, I got to be creative all the time, or I'm.
And that's a theme in your life. Is you've got these gifts, they're coming out in you, but you want to make sure they go towards good and towards positive solutions to the world.
Right.
What a great philosophy for living.
Yeah. So most of the problems that I solved were on how to use the energy. They weren't how to build panels or put them up. They were how to get a small amount of energy that only happens when the sun shines to supply water full-time out of a well, or to keep the lights on in the house even at night, and how to do it with absolutely the minimum amount of power. So we looked at what does it take to, in a remote home that has no electricity to begin with, what do we need to light up a book to read? Well, it turns out we need only a few watts. Starting in the 80s with small fluorescent lights that came out then, 7 watts was all we needed to light up a book or even a desk. And so we started with that assumption, not the more typical 50-watt assumption or 100-watt assumption. So from 50 watts down to 7, now we're down at 1/6 of the power requirement. And so we need a much smaller panel than somebody at the National Labs was saying needs to be used for a conventional home. I just ignored that stuff because it was irrelevant, it was nonsense. Those are the people saying this is decades away. Well, this was in 1980, and I was doing it for people who didn't even have much money. That's why they were living without electricity. But they could afford a few hundred, $1,000, a couple $1,000 over a year or so period to build up a little system that could run 5 lights and a little TV, and they'd have a gas refrigerator, and ultimately the systems got bigger and bigger, and we began having full-size fridges and washing machines and everything else, but all done always with this efficiency in mind, so that we're using only the amount of energy that we really need to do the end use job. And that's where the design begins. It's not from panels, it's from what's the end use that we're trying to accomplish, how to do it with a minimum amount of energy.
We talked a little bit off program about the message that you would want to leave for someone watching the show or for the next generation. It's tied to what you were just saying. Can you paraphrase that?
Well, be realistic about what people really, really need. Not what tax credits and the political whims are supporting this year, but what is really needed. So my business didn't come and go with the coming and going of tax credits and subsidies. It stayed steady and grew, even when tax credits were taken away. because I was supplying stuff that people needed regardless and didn't have otherwise. They didn't have quiet energy if they had to start a generator. So, so I went for, not saying everybody should do this, but what I looked for was supply a service and products that people really need. And if they don't have it, their life isn't as good. And find those markets.
And where would you like to see us head with our renewable energies in New Mexico?
We absolutely need to head into the efficiency and management of the uses of energy. So that we're not, if I can take a home and cut it down to a quarter the use of energy, which means getting rid of waste. It doesn't mean necessarily using less. It means wasting less. If I can cut that down to a quarter, then I can supply it with a quarter of the size of wires, I can supply it with a quarter of the capacity of power plant, and at a less than a quarter of the cost. So that one step of shrinking that aspect is far more productive than a 4 times improvement in any other part of the system.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for bringing your energy and your light to the program. And I would love to spend another hour with you. We've got a lot more ground to cover, but I appreciate you visiting with us.
Thank you. You too, Sean.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back with our next guest, Alan Sindelar. Welcome back to Renewable New Mexico. Today's topic is Growing a Renewable Business Part 1, Bootstrapping. Our guest is Alan Sindelar, founder of Positive Energy, active throughout the Rio Grande Corridor. Alan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start off with a simple question. How did you end up in New Mexico?
It actually starts back in Oregon. It starts with my first exposure to renewable energy, to clean energy at the time. I'd moved up to Oregon to straighten out my life, go back to college. Found out I could take some of the same classes for free at the community college, so I stuck out my thumb to go and find out about them. I was picked up by a physicist, and in 8 miles, my life was changed. It turns out he was the instructor at the college in something called alternate energy sources. And in that 8 miles, he told me about his class, he told me about the topic. I had always worked with my hands. I'd always had an interest in mechanical things, but I was way too rebellious against the engineering school my parents wanted. So suddenly I'd found something. And I took his class, and I took every other class I could find in that first set of fledgling years of renewable energy, and really never looked back because I'd found a focus. And the neatest thing, I kept looking for this man. And 30-some years later, with the help of the internet, I actually found him and thanked him. And I, sent him to my website, sent him to my bio, said, "Here,
Well,
look what you did."
We have to give his name. This, amazing
His name was
instructor.
Henry H. Knapp. He went by Dr. Knapp after the story in the Whole Earth catalog of that time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. It's neat.
And so he really lit this fire in you for renewable energy.
We never know how we're going to affect the lives of others.
And how did that get you here?
Yes.
So we're in Oregon.
Yes. Yes.
We're a few states away.
Yes, so I had taken the classes, and I'd done some passive solar work, and I'd worked as a carpenter. And I ended up in the mid-'80s working for Amory and Hunter Lovins. I had read in that first class a paper that was assigned in Foreign Affairs called Energy Strategy, The Road Not Taken. And that was really the watershed essay articulating a softer way, a way that didn't involve fossil fuel and nuclear, that was based on clean renewable energy and was based on efficiency. And I ended up years later working for the man who had written that, Amory Lovins, who had founded Rocky Mountain Institute. I worked there for 2 years taking care of that building, that institute building in Old Snowmass, Colorado. And it was a remarkable experience, but at that time in my life, it was pretty cerebral. It was pretty cut off at the neck, and I was looking for something that was more heart-centered. I was looking for a different direction. Through a monastery up there, I found out about this spiritual community in northern New Mexico called Lama Foundation. And I lived at Lama Foundation between 88 and 89. That's an ecumenical spiritual community north of Taos, and that was the first place I'd ever seen solar electricity. I mean, that I had the chance to get in my hands and work with. And I had taken my first solar class at what became later Solar Energy International, and now is well known, very well known. Well, back then it was classes at a community college up there. Through that, I was introduced or told about a class in solar water pumping run by somebody I'd never met named Wendy Dankoff. And he was right in my local area. I went to a one-day class on solar water pumping in about 1988, and we became friends as a result of that. In 1995, oh, and I should mention that the power system at Lama I rebuilt in 1989, and it was used for about 10 years. In 1995, a forest fire came through and took out about half the buildings at Lama Foundation. The Lama Beans, that's what they called themselves, called Wendy down in Espanola, or Santa Fe at the time. Wendy called me where I was doing solar work up in western Colorado, and that started the conversation that led to my purchasing for a pittance and an unsecured note Wendy Dankoff's retail operations, and that's how. And I moved down to New Mexico from Colorado in the winter of 1997. I remember driving back and forth to meet Wendy with the Hale-Bopp Comet lighting the way at night when on roads where there were no other lights. You know, up in far northern New Mexico and southern Colorado.
That's a New Mexican story right
there. That's a New Mexican story in an old Volvo, and that's how I ended up here.
That's wonderful. That's an incredible story.
It's a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as owner of this business, do you have a favorite project or a focus of that? Can you tell us? Positive Energy is the company that you ended up taking over. Can you tell us what you guys do and what you enjoy about it?
Yes. We simply build the systems, design, build, service, support, educate the systems that turn light into electricity. And then, as Wendy was describing in the earlier session, how to make that electricity do useful things. And when I started the business, I would say that 98%, at least 95% of what we did was called off-grid solar. That's solar beyond the reach of the power lines, where there is no utility power, whether it's for water pumping or for running a home or for a internet site in later years. It wasn't in the first years. But almost everything we did was off-grid. And we did our first of what has become our main product of mainstream, batteryless, utility intertide, what's called grid-tied solar. My crew, we were just a single crew, and I were doing our first day of our first installation on 9/11/01 of that kind of system. Wow. Trying to listen to the news on coming off the truck radio down in the driveway. That changed a whole lot in the American culture, and we were already doing what we could for global security.
So that must have really solidified that you were doing the right thing on that day.
It's always been important to do the right thing and do work that reflected my values, and so yeah, I guess that day it's stayed in my memory. The passionate part is, as the company has grown, and we have maybe 45 employees now, something like that. We're still local, we're still locally owned, employee owned, and all that. But the point is not that. The point is, as the company has grown, most of what we do is the grid-tied solar, residential, commercial. You know, it's putting it on and reducing somebody's power bill. The more we've grown, the more I've retreated from running the business into the part that always incited my passion, which is the off-grid, which is the cultural creatives, the people who don't think along the mainstream, who have now chosen even when they had the choice, to live beyond the reach of the power lines, to kind of be modern-day high-tech homesteaders in many cases, to be responsible for their own energy consumption to a greater degree.
Wonderful. I'm noticing with all of these interviews that you can't get involved with renewable energy and solar energy and not have it touch you in a personal way and in your personal life. How has it changed the way that you live now?
Here's a little vignette when I attempt to explain it to somebody wanting to do it for the first time. We're so used to just having energy at the flip of a switch. It's cheap, it's abundant. You know, we generally aren't affected by the consequences directly of its generation, and we take it for granted. When you live off grid, well, the story is what I call toast, pancakes, and waffles. I'll get up on an ordinary morning, say in the winter, and I'll check two things. I'll check my system monitor to find out how full my batteries are. Did they get full yesterday? Was there enough sun? Are they now at 90% full because of what I used overnight? Well, then I know it's, and then I'll look out the window. That was the other thing. I'll look out the window and I'll see what's the weather going to be. If it looks like the batteries are going to get full today, that's a normal day. I'll make a bagel in the toaster. I use a little bit of that excess energy for heat. Well, if I go out and maybe it's spring or it's fall and there's just an abundance of sun, I'll break out the waffle iron. I've got this wonderful gift of free energy. The sun is providing its abundance. I can do that. At the same time, if I look at my meter and my batteries are at 60% and it's still gray because it's still snowing and it hasn't cleared up yet, it's not like freezing in the dark. It's not doing without. I'll just make pancakes on the stove.
So we've got the title of your first book, Bagels, Waffles, or Pancakes?
Toast, Pancakes, and Waffles. Well, there's actually a Home Power article with that title. You know, so I've already been through this one. But the whole point is we live more consciously when we live with clean energy, because we live with the rhythms and the natural cycles of what's available.
And that's a wonderful thought to leave with.
One of the things that I find valuable about that kind of life. That's
the thought that you'd like to leave with people.
It's one of many. Have we got 3 hours?
we can sum it up with that. That's
sure.
A beautiful metaphor. Like, I love were my batteries charged like yesterday? It's like, are my batteries charged?
Yeah.
Okay, I can go forward.
And most of the year, I have an abundance. You see, once my batteries are full, any energy not used is energy wasted.
That's wonderful.
So I might as well leave all the lights on. You don't think of living off grid as that way.
Right.
But in the winter, I become the energy czar of the family. I have 3 teenagers. I'm the one that says, no, you just really can't do that now, or we'll have to run the generator for backup.
Well, thank you so much for being so informative and sharing your incredible story of how you ended up here. We appreciate your energy that you brought to the program today.
Thank you very much for the
chance.
chance.
Hope you come back.
Thank you.
That's our program. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us next week for another episode of Renewable New Mexico. Until next time, this is Sean Wells reminding you, we are all solar powered.